It's 1981, and America's most controlled TV host is about to break down on live television. Jimmy Stewart, the famous actor, sits across from Johnny Carson holding a wrinkled piece of paper. What happens next will destroy Carson's fake smile and show the lonely, hurt man behind 30 years of perfect TV. But Stewart wasn't the only guest to break through Carson's walls. Tonight, we're revealing the final, heartbreaking words. Johnny Carson said to his 9 most loved guests, words that show the deep loneliness of America's most famous entertainer and the terrible price he paid for 3 decades of flawless performance. For 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late-night TV with perfect control. But what most of America never knew was that behind that perfectly timed smile lived a man fighting with deep emotional loneliness. Carson's childhood in Nebraska had created wounds that would hurt him his entire career. Growing up with Ruth Carson, a mother who was cold and only showed love when young Johnny was doing magic tricks or entertaining guests, he learned early that love only came when he performed. This terrible lesson shaped every relationship he would have for the rest of his life, creating a huge need for approval mixed with a fear of real closeness. The Tonight Show became both Carson's greatest success and his most detailed prison. Night after night, he would change into the Johnny Carson that America loved. Funny, charming, effortlessly cool. But the moment those cameras stopped rolling, the mask would fall away, showing a man who felt more comfortable with strangers than with his own family. His marriages fell apart because he couldn't show real emotion, and his children grew up with a father who could charm millions but couldn't say, "I love you," to those who needed it most. It was this deep personal struggle that made his connections with certain guests so special. These were the rare people who somehow managed to get past his carefully built walls to touch the hurt man underneath. During his rule, about 22,000 guests appeared on The Tonight Show, but only 9 earned Carson's real trust and love. These weren't simply his most famous or successful guests, but the performers who understood something basic about the lonely art of entertainment, that behind every great performer lives a hurt human being desperate to be seen and understood. Bob Hope represented everything Carson both admired and feared about staying in show business for a long time. By their later shows together, Hope's performances had become more and more dependent on cards with his lines written on them, something that privately scared Carson. Having built his career on being spontaneous and real with guests, Carson watched with growing worry as Hope's once sharp ability to think on his feet got worse. The sad part wasn't Hope's aging. It was watching a comedy giant reduced to reading other people's words, a fate that haunted Carson as he thought about his own death. After Hope's final appearance, Carson walked up to him backstage with clear emotion, grabbing the older man's hands and saying, "Thanks for everything. Bob, you never missed ever." The words carried the weight of Carson's own fears about getting old in the entertainment business, recognizing that Hope's greatest achievement wasn't his comedy, but his steady professionalism, even as his gifts faded. Dean Martin brought out something in Carson that few guests ever saw: real, unguarded joy. Martin's carefully created drunk character hid one of the smartest and most controlled performers in show business. And Carson, who spent every waking moment managing every part of his show and image, found Martin's seeming carelessness exciting. During their segments, viewers could see Carson physically relax, his shoulders dropping, his smile becoming less calculated and more real. Martin's unpredictability created the kind of spontaneous moments that Carson wanted, but rarely allowed himself to experience. Their final exchange showed Carson's secret wish. "Don't change? Dino, the world needs at least one guy who never takes it seriously." The comment reflected Carson's desperate desire to be more like Martin, unafraid of looking foolish, free from the constant pressure to be perfect, able to simply enjoy the moment without calculating how it would affect his carefully maintained image. George Burns represented the father figure. Carson had never had someone who could offer both wisdom and love without conditions. Burns continued performing well into his 90s, giving Carson hope for his own future. Unlike his relationship with Hope, Carson's admiration for Burns only grew with time. As he watched the older comedian survive personal tragedies and industry changes, coming out not bitter or broken, but somehow more alive and funny than ever, Carson, who lived in constant fear of becoming irrelevant, found in Burns proof that true artists could not only survive but succeed through life's challenges. During Burns's final appearance, Carson's comment, "George, you're the only guy I know who gets funnier every year," was said with clear emotion, recognizing that Burns had something Carson desperately wanted: the ability to find joy and humor even in life's darkest moments. Lucille Ball represented the fearless creativity that Carson admired above all else. Ball had changed television by refusing to accept limitations, fighting studio bosses, and creating groundbreaking television through pure force of will. Carson, who dealt with network politics every night, deeply respected Ball's courage in standing up to powerful men who tried to diminish her vision. After her final appearance, Carson's backstage comment, "You're the real deal, Lucy. Always were," recognized not just her talent, but her honesty in an industry that often rewarded compromise. When Ball died in 1989, Carson broke his own rule about keeping professional distance, spending an entire segment on an emotional tribute. For a man who rarely let personal feelings show on camera, this public display of grief showed his recognition that he had lost one of the few people who truly understood the weight of carrying an entire show night after night. Jack Benny's influence on Carson went beyond professional admiration. Benny had literally taught Carson how to perform. Every pause, every perfectly timed reaction, every moment of listening rather than talking could be traced back to Carson's obsessive study of Benny's technique. Carson's usual need to control every part of his show would disappear whenever Benny appeared. Instead, he would sit back and learn from a master. Their final exchange carried the weight of a student thanking his most important teacher. "You taught me how to listen." The comment acknowledged that Benny had shown Carson that the most powerful moments in entertainment often came not from what was said, but from what was left unsaid, from the pauses that allowed audiences to connect emotionally. Burt Reynolds brought chaos to Carson's carefully ordered world. And surprisingly, Carson found that chaos freeing. Their legendary relationship began when Reynolds spontaneously hit Carson with shaving cream during a straightforward interview. Instead of being annoyed, Carson was delighted, recognizing someone who understood that the best television came from genuine, unplanned moments. Reynolds had something Carson envied: the courage to look foolish if it helped entertain people. Carson's final words to Reynolds, "Don't ever stop coming back. Burt, I need someone to keep me honest," revealed a deep truth. Beneath the polished professional exterior lived someone who desperately wanted to break free from the constraints of his own perfectionism. Burnett represented everything Carson valued most in a performer: natural warmth, quick intelligence, and complete lack of fake behavior. Carson's trust in Burnett was so complete that he would abandon his usual tight control whenever she appeared, allowing her segments to run long and even letting her take over portions of the show. Their collaboration felt less like host interviewing guest and more like two master craftspeople creating something beautiful together. Carson's final comment to Burnett, "If I could build a show around just one person, it would be you," represented perhaps the highest compliment he could give, acknowledging that she had all the qualities he valued most: talent, honesty, and the rare ability to create genuine connection without sacrificing authenticity. Bob Newhart shared with Carson something that went beyond professional admiration: a basic understanding of what made comedy work. Both men specialized in understatement and perfect timing, and their shared Midwestern backgrounds created an immediate bond. When Newhart appeared, Carson would visibly relax, as if talking with a brother rather than interviewing a guest. Their friendship extended into Carson's closely guarded private life, with the two men occasionally playing golf together. Carson's final words to Newhart, "Nobody made it look easier, but I know how hard you worked," acknowledged the careful craft behind seemingly effortless comedy, recognition that came from Carson's own understanding of how much effort was required to appear natural on television. But it was Jimmy Stewart who provided the most profound and life-changing moment of Carson's entire career. In 1981, Stewart appeared carrying a piece of paper and, with Carson's encouragement, read a simple poem he had written about his beloved golden retriever, Bo, who had recently died. As Stewart read, his voice cracked with real grief, and by the time he finished, both men had tears in their eyes. For Carson, famous for his emotional control, this represented a complete breakdown of his carefully maintained defenses. Viewers watched in amazement as Carson briefly cried on camera before simply saying, "Thank you for sharing that, Jimmy." After the cameras stopped rolling, Carson walked up to Stewart backstage, hugged him with tears in his eyes, and said words that would haunt him forever. "I'll never forget that. You just gave us something real." This moment represented a revelation for Carson. He suddenly understood that showing genuine emotion could create more powerful television than all his careful professional control. Stewart had given Carson permission to be human on television, a gift that would influence his work for the remaining years of his career. These relationships represented far more than professional associations. They were windows into Carson's soul, revealing his deepest values, fears, and longings. They offered Carson something he found nowhere else: genuine human connection without the complications of romance or family drama. These were people who saw past his fame to the lonely perfectionist beneath, who understood the weight he carried night after night, and who offered him the rare gift of acceptance without judgment. As Carson aged and stepped away from The Tonight Show, these connections took on even greater meaning. They represented proof that even someone as emotionally guarded as Carson could create meaningful relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They showed that beneath his professional facade lived a man capable of deep feeling and authentic connection, even if he could only safely express those emotions. Within his television studio, Johnny Carson spent 30 years perfecting the art of appearing perfectly, controlled while secretly longing for authentic connection. His greatest performances weren't his monologues or sketches, but those brief, unguarded moments when he allowed himself to be genuinely moved by others' humanity. These weren't just famous faces. They were the people who made Johnny Carson lower his guard, open his heart, and remind us all that beneath every great performer lives a vulnerable human being, desperately hoping to be seen, understood, and loved.